The ancient warning bells of Corallis Prime had not sounded in over 3,000 years. Today they rang with a desperate urgency that made every living being in the massive space station tremble. Commander Vel pressed her crystalline fingers against the tactical display, watching as another star system vanished from the galactic map. The void swarm had consumed everything in the Tertian sector within mere days. "How many refugees this time?" she asked without looking away from the screen. 47 million souls from the Benthi homeworld, reported Lieutenant Nex, his gaseous form flickering with stress patterns. The evacuation ships are requesting immediate docking permission. Vel closed her eyes for a moment. The Benthi were among the most peaceful species in the Union, their entire culture built around scholarly pursuits and artistic expression. Now they were homeless, their beautiful crystal libraries and floating gardens reduced to cosmic dust in the belly of an ancient horror that should have remained asleep forever, the war room filled with the representatives of dozens of species, each one bearing the same expression of barely contained panic. The Colliery queens clicked their mandibles in agitation, their normally perfect hive coordination disrupted by fear. The Nephori floated in their atmospheric suits, their songs reduced to worried whispers. Even the mighty Theron, whose species had once conquered half the galaxy through sheer military might, seemed small and defeated. "The swarm has breached the meridian line," announced General Crix, his scaled hide showing the stress marks that only appeared when a Theron warrior faced impossible odds. "Our best estimates give us perhaps 2 standard months before they reach the core systems." Vel felt the familiar weight of command settle on her shoulders. As the highest-ranking officer in the Union Defense Force, the responsibility for finding a solution rested entirely with her. The problem was simple to state and impossible to solve. The void swarm adapted to everything they threw at it. Every weapon, every strategy, every defensive measure became useless within hours of deployment. "What about the Artificial Intelligence Project?" asked Dr. Marin, the lead researcher from the Aldery Science Council. "The quantum minds we developed specifically to counter their adaptation patterns?" "Corrupted," Crix replied grimly. "The swarm somehow infected them with viral thoughts. Our own machines turned against us within the first engagement." The room fell silent except for the background hum of the station's systems and the distant sound of refugee ships docking. Vel stared at the tactical display, watching the red markers that represented swarm activity spread like a disease across the galaxy. In her 300 years of life, she had never seen anything like this. The swarm was not just a military threat, it was an existential one. "There is one option we have not explored," said a quiet voice from the back of the room. Dr. Finn, the Union's chief xenobiologist, stepped forward. His pale features showed the strain of sleepless nights spent researching impossible solutions. "The quarantine files contain data on a species that might be able to help us." "The quarantine worlds are sealed for good reason," Vel replied. "Those planets contain either diseases that could wipe out civilization or species too dangerous for contact." "I understand the risks," Finn continued, "but consider our current situation. The swarm has consumed over 60% of our territory. Traditional warfare has proven completely ineffective. Perhaps it is time to consider unconventional solutions." He activated a holographic display showing a small blue world orbiting a yellow star. "This is Sol 3, classified as a death world and quarantined for the past 2,000 years. The dominant species there has survived conditions that would kill most galactic citizens within minutes." The assembled representatives leaned forward to examine the data. The planet's specifications were horrifying, crushing gravity that would flatten most species, an atmosphere so corrosive it would burn through standard environmental suits, radiation levels that would cause immediate cellular breakdown, and weather patterns so violent they regularly reshaped entire continents. "How does anything survive there?" whispered a Nephori delegate. "That's exactly the question," Finn replied. "These humans, as they call themselves, not only survive but thrive in conditions we consider uninhabitable. They have developed adaptations that are unprecedented in galactic biology. Most importantly, they have learned to fight wars in environments that would kill their enemies simply by existing. Vel studied the data with growing interest. The humans had fought countless wars throughout their history, developing military strategies that seemed almost incomprehensible to civilized species. They used their hostile environment as a weapon, turning the very conditions that should have killed them into advantages over their enemies. Their psychological profiles are equally remarkable, Finn continued. They show an unusual tendency to become more effective under stress rather than less. When faced with impossible odds, they adapt and overcome rather than surrender. They have a concept called refusing to die that seems to be central to their culture. General Crick studied the human military data with professional interest. These battle reports are disturbing. They fight with a level of brutality that would be considered war crimes by Union standards. Yet they also show remarkable creativity and adaptability. They improvise weapons from debris, use tactics that seem chaotic but prove effective, and never retreat even when logically they should. The question is whether they would be willing to help us, Vel said. We have maintained the quarantine for their protection as much as ours. They have no knowledge of the galactic community and no reason to trust us. The swarm will reach their system eventually, Finn pointed out. If we are going to make contact, it should be now while we still have the resources to do so properly. The alternative is that they discover the galaxy exists when the swarm arrives to consume their world. The debate continued for hours, with representatives arguing the ethics and practicality of contacting a quarantined species. Some worried about contamination, others about the moral implications of asking a primitive species to fight their wars. But as the reports continued to arrive of more systems falling to the swarm, the arguments became academic. Finally, Vel made the decision that would change the course of galactic history. Prepare a contact probe. We will send them a message explaining our situation and ask for their help. If they refuse, we will respect that decision. If they accept, we will do everything in our power to support them. The probe was launched 3 days later, carrying a simple message encoded in mathematical sequences that any technological species should be able to understand. The message was brief and desperate. The universe is dying. We need Deathworlders. As the probe disappeared into hyperspace, Vel wondered if they had just made the galaxy's salvation possible or sealed its doom. Only time would tell if the humans were the solution they needed or simply another species destined to be consumed by the endless hunger of the void swarm. The coffee in Dr. Emma Rodriguez's mug had gone cold hours ago, but she barely noticed. Her eyes remained fixed on the data streaming across her computer screen, showing impossible readings from the metallic object that had crashed into the Antarctic ice sheet 3 days earlier. The European Space Agency's most advanced scanning equipment confirmed what her initial analysis had suggested. This was not of human origin. Still no response from the Beijing facility? She asked her assistant. Dr. Patel, who was running similar tests on material samples they had managed to extract from the crash site. Nothing useful, Patel replied, adjusting his glasses as he studied the molecular structure displayed on his screen. The Chinese team is being cautious about sharing data, but their preliminary reports match ours. This alloy contains elements that do not exist in our periodic table. Emma rubbed her tired eyes and looked out the window of the research station. The Antarctic landscape stretched endlessly in all directions, a frozen wasteland that most humans considered uninhabitable. Yet here they were, not just surviving, but conducting advanced scientific research in conditions that would kill an unprotected person within minutes. She had never thought of Earth as particularly hostile until now. The breakthrough came when Dr. Patel discovered that the object was not just a crashed probe, but an active communication device. The mathematical sequences it transmitted were complex but clearly artificial, showing patterns that suggested intelligence behind their creation. It took the combined efforts of mathematicians, linguists, and computer scientists from around the world to decode the message. When the translation finally appeared on her screen, Emma felt her world change forever. The message was simple and terrifying. The universe is dying. We need Deathworlders. The emergency session of the United Nations Security Council convened within hours of the message's decoding. Representatives from every major nation gathered. In New York, their faces showing the same mixture of excitement and terror that Emma felt. The reality of alien contact was overwhelming enough, but the implications of their message were staggering. "Ladies and gentlemen," announced Secretary General Martinez, "we are no longer alone in the universe. The question now is how we respond to this request for help." General Hayes, representing the military perspective, stood to address the assembly. "We need to approach this situation with extreme caution. This could be a trap, an invasion disguised as a request for assistance. We have no way of knowing the true intentions of these aliens. The mathematical proofs they provided show advanced knowledge of physics and engineering," countered Dr. Yuki Tanaka, the lead physicist on the translation team. "Their technology is clearly superior to ours, which means they would not need deception to conquer us if that was their goal." Emma found herself called upon to explain the scientific implications of the message. "Based on the data we have decoded, the aliens are part of a galactic civilization that is under attack by something they call the Void Swarm. They have identified Earth as what they term a death world and believe that humans might be uniquely suited to help them fight this threat." The debate continued for days, with representatives arguing every aspect of the situation. Some wanted to ignore the message entirely, believing that involvement in galactic affairs could only bring disaster to Earth. Others saw it as humanity's chance to join a larger cosmic community. The military leaders worried about the security implications, while scientists pushed for immediate contact and cooperation. During a break in the proceedings, Emma found herself in conversation with Captain Alex Turner, a veteran of some of Earth's most dangerous military operations. His weathered face showed the kind of confidence that came from surviving situations that would break most people. "What do you think they mean by Deathworlders?" he asked, studying the translated message on his tablet. "I think they see Earth as a hostile environment," Emma replied. "The probe's data suggests that most planets in the galaxy have much gentler conditions than ours. Lower gravity, stable weather, fewer natural disasters. They might think of us as adapted to extreme conditions." Turner nodded thoughtfully. "In special operations, we train in the worst environments on Earth: Arctic survival, desert warfare, underwater combat. If their people come from easy worlds, they might not understand how to fight in truly hostile conditions." "Would you be willing to help them?" Emma asked. "If they really need help fighting something that threatens the entire galaxy, then yes," Turner replied without hesitation. "But I would want to understand exactly what we are getting into first." The final decision came after a week of intense debate. The Security Council voted to authorize a response mission, with Captain Turner leading a small team of volunteers. The decision was not unanimous, but the majority agreed that humanity could not ignore a threat that might eventually reach Earth. Anyway, the aliens provided detailed instructions for modifying one of Earth's spacecraft to survive the journey to their space station. The technical requirements were staggering, requiring life support systems capable of operating in environments that the aliens considered normal but humans would find barely survivable. The gravity alone would be crushing the most humans, and the atmospheric composition would require constant monitoring to prevent poisoning. Emma volunteered to join the mission despite the dangers, arguing that her expertise in xenobiology would be essential for understanding the alien species and the threat they faced. Dr. Patel also joined the team, bringing his knowledge of extreme environment survival and his experience with the probe's technology. The team spent weeks preparing for the mission, undergoing intensive training in zero-gravity combat, emergency medical procedures, and cross-species communication protocols. They studied every piece of data the aliens had provided, trying to understand the nature of the Void Swarm and the galactic civilization they were about to encounter. The modified spacecraft was barely recognizable as human technology when the aliens finished their upgrades. The life support systems were pushed to their absolute limits. The propulsion system operated on principles that human science was only beginning to understand, and the communications array could transmit across galactic distances in real dash time. As the team prepared for launch, Emma reflected on how much their understanding of humanity's place in the universe had changed. They were no longer the dominant species on a single planet, but a small part of a vast galactic community. More importantly, they were apparently the only species in that community that had learned to thrive in conditions that others considered deadly. The launch itself was unlike anything humanity had ever attempted. The spacecraft accelerated beyond the capabilities of any human-built vessel, using technologies that folded space-time in ways that made conventional physics seem primitive. As Earth fell away behind them, the team knew they were embarking on a journey that would either save the galaxy or lead to humanity's first contact with an enemy that had already consumed countless worlds. Captain Turner looked at his team as they settled in for the long journey ahead. Remember, we are not just representing Earth anymore. We are representing every human who has ever survived something that should have killed them. Let's make sure we do not disappoint. The journey to the alien space station would take several days, giving them time to prepare for their first face-to-face encounter with the species that had called them Deathworlders. Emma wondered if they would live up to that reputation, or if they would discover that being human was not enough to save a dying galaxy. The docking bay of Corelli's Prime stretched for kilometers in every direction, filled with refugee ships from dozens of different species. Emma Rodriguez pressed her face against the porthole of their modified spacecraft, watching as beings she had only imagined in science fiction moved through the massive space station. Some floated in atmospheric bubbles, others walked on multiple legs, and a few seemed to be made of living crystal that reflected the station's lights in rainbow patterns. Gravity is about 60% of Earth normal, reported Captain Turner, checking his instruments. Atmosphere is thin but breathable. Temperature is comfortable for us, but probably cold for the locals. Dr. Patel was already taking readings with his portable scanner. The atmospheric composition is fascinating. They have managed to create a mixture that works for dozens of different species, though I suspect most of them need additional support to be fully comfortable. As their ship settled into the docking clamps, Emma felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. This was humanity's first official contact with an alien civilization, and they were here not as explorers or diplomats but as potential soldiers in a war that was already consuming the galaxy. The airlock opened with a soft hiss, revealing a delegation of alien beings waiting to greet them. Commander Vell stepped forward, her crystalline form catching the light as she moved. Her appearance was both beautiful and alien, with faceted skin that seemed to shift color as she breathed. "Welcome to Corelli's Prime," she said, her voice coming through a translation device that made her words sound oddly formal. "I am Commander Vell of the Union Defense Force. We are grateful that you have chosen to answer our call for help." Captain Turner stepped forward and offered a formal salute. "Captain Alex Turner, representing Earth and humanity. These are Dr. Emma Rodriguez and Dr. Patel, our scientific advisors. We are here to learn about your situation and see how we can help." As they walked through the station's corridors, Emma noticed how the other species reacted to their presence. Some stared in fascination, others backed away in what seemed like fear. A few appeared to be having difficulty breathing, despite the station's carefully controlled atmosphere. The station's gravity and atmospheric conditions are set to the galactic standard, Commander Vell explained as they entered a large conference room. "Most species find these conditions comfortable, though some require additional support." "This feels light to us," Turner replied casually. "We are used to higher gravity and thicker air. Our homeworld has conditions that most species would find difficult to survive." The alien commander paused in her explanation, studying the humans with new interest. "You are not wearing environmental suits or requiring atmospheric support. The gravity does not seem to be affecting your movement patterns." Emma realized that what they considered normal was extraordinary to the galactic community. "Earth has heavier gravity than this station, and our atmosphere is much denser. We have also evolved to function in a wide range of temperatures and atmospheric pressures. The briefing about the Void Swarm was both enlightening and terrifying. The enemy was unlike anything humanity had ever encountered, a species that consumed entire star systems, adapted to every weapon used against it, and corrupted the very technology designed to fight it. The Union had lost 60% of its territory in less than a year, and their retreat was becoming a rout. "Every strategy we have tried has failed," explained General Crix, the Theran military commander. "The swarm learns from each encounter and becomes immune to our tactics. We have never faced an enemy that could adapt this quickly." Dr. Patel leaned forward with interest. "How long does it take for them to adapt to a new weapon or strategy?" "Usually within hours of first contact," Crix replied. "Sometimes faster if the tactic is similar to something they have encountered before." Emma and Turner exchanged glances. In human warfare, adaptation was considered a basic survival skill. Military units that could not adapt to changing conditions were quickly eliminated. The idea of an enemy that could adapt faster than you could change tactics was not foreign to human military thinking. "We would like to examine one of your recent battle sites," Turner said. "If possible, we would like to see how the swarm operates in actual combat conditions." The aliens seemed hesitant at first, but eventually agreed to take the humans to a partially consumed mining station on the edge of swarm territory. The journey gave Emma time to study the Union's military technology and tactics. Their weapons were incredibly advanced, their strategies elegant and efficient, and their coordination perfect. They fought like a civilization that had known peace for centuries and was struggling to remember how to wage war. The mining station was a scene of devastation. The swarm had consumed most of the structure, leaving behind only twisted metal and empty void. But there were still active swarm organisms in the wreckage, giving the humans their first direct look at the enemy. "The station's atmosphere is toxic," warned Commander Vell. "The swarm has released biological agents that will kill most oxygen-breathing species within minutes." Turner checked his atmospheric readings and shrugged. "It is not great, but we can breathe it for a while. The toxin levels are high, but not immediately fatal for humans." Emma was already suiting up in her exploration gear, designed for Earth's most hostile environments. "We need to get closer to study their behavior patterns. Dr. Patel, can you monitor the atmospheric conditions and warn us if they get worse?" What happened next changed everything the Union thought they knew about warfare. The humans did not approach the swarm organisms with careful, methodical tactics. Instead, they moved through the dangerous environment like they belonged there, using the station's failing systems and toxic atmosphere to their advantage when their weapons failed. To penetrate the swarm's adaptive defenses, Torres, the team's engineer, simply built new ones from the station's debris. When the creatures adapted to their attack patterns, Turner switched to tactics that seemed random but proved devastatingly effective. When their equipment began failing in the toxic environment, they improvised solutions that worked better than the original designs. Most importantly, they never stopped fighting. Every time the swarm adapted to their tactics, the humans adapted faster. They used the creature's own adaptation speed against them, changing their approach so quickly that the swarm could not keep up. It was like watching someone fight a chess master by constantly changing the rules of the game. The breakthrough came when Dr. Patel realized that the swarm's adaptation was based on prediction algorithms. The creatures analyzed their enemies' behavior patterns and developed countermeasures based on logical assumptions about how the fight would progress. But human tactics were often illogical, driven by desperation, creativity, and a willingness to try anything that might work. "They are trying to predict our behavior," Patel explained as they fought their way through the station's corridors. "But our tactics are not based on optimal efficiency. We are fighting like humans, not like machines." The final confrontation with the swarm node was unlike anything the Union had ever witnessed. The humans did not retreat when their weapons failed or their equipment broke. Instead, they used the station's own systems against the creatures, turning the failing power grid into a weapon and the toxic atmosphere into a shield. when the swarm node finally died, it was not because of superior technology or perfect tactics. It was because the humans had refused to give up, adapting faster than the enemy could counter-adapt, fighting with a combination of desperation and creativity that the swarm had never encountered before. As they returned to Corallis Prime, Emma realized that humanity's greatest strength was not their technology or their physical abilities. It was their refusal to accept that anything was impossible. On Earth, they had learned to fight against odds that would break most species. In the galaxy, that same mindset might be exactly what was needed to turn the tide against an enemy that had consumed countless worlds. Commander Vel studied the battle reports with growing amazement. How did you know those tactics would work? We did not, Turner replied honestly. We just kept trying different things until something worked. That is what humans do when we cannot win by following the rules. For the first time since the swarm had awakened, the Union had hope. The Deathworlders had arrived, and they fought like nothing the galaxy had ever seen. The arrival of the second wave of human ships caused a sensation throughout Corallis Prime. Word of the mining station victory had spread through the refugee populations like wildfire, and now beings from dozens of species gathered to watch as humanity's reinforcements docked with the massive space station. Emma Rodriguez stood in the observation deck with Commander Vel, watching as ship after ship emerged from hyperspace. How many did Earth send? Vel asked, her crystalline features reflecting the lights of the approaching vessels. 12,000 volunteers, Emma replied, checking her tablet. Special Forces operators, Arctic survival experts, deep-sea researchers, volcanic engineers, and combat medics. Every person who volunteered passed selection criteria that would eliminate most of your species before they even started. The aliens were unprepared for what emerged from the human ships. These were not the careful, methodical soldiers that the Union was accustomed to. These were people who had spent their lives working in Earth's most hostile environments, who treated danger as a daily companion and impossible conditions as just another day at the office. Captain Turner had been promoted to overall commander of human forces, and he wasted no time in establishing training programs for the Union's military units. The first joint training exercise was scheduled for the station's main combat simulator, designed to test tactics against swarm organisms in controlled conditions. The key to fighting the swarm is not to fight them the way they expect, Turner explained to a mixed group of Union officers and human specialists. They adapt to logical tactics, efficient strategies, and predictable patterns. We need to teach you to fight like humans. The Benthy officers, with their scholarly approach to warfare, struggled to understand the concept of deliberately inefficient tactics. The Colliery warriors, accustomed to perfect coordination, found it difficult to embrace the chaos that human combat required. But slowly, they began to learn. Dr. Lisa Park, a volcanic researcher from Earth, demonstrated how to use environmental hazards as weapons. She showed the Union forces how to turn a space station's own systems against invaders, how to use atmospheric pressure differences to create improvised explosives, and how to make toxic environments work in their favor. On Earth, we learned that survival often depends on making the environment your ally rather than your enemy, she explained to a group of fascinated alien engineers. The swarm treats hostile conditions as obstacles to overcome. We treat them as tools to use. The psychological training was even more challenging. Chief Psychiatrist Dr. Roberts worked with Union personnel to help them overcome their instinctive responses to danger. Most species had evolved to retreat from impossible situations, to preserve their lives when victory was not achievable. Humans had evolved to keep fighting even when logic said they should surrender. Your species has a concept called acceptable losses, Roberts explained during a training session. You calculate the cost of victory and decide whether it is worth paying. Humans have a different concept, unacceptable defeat. We would rather die fighting than live with surrender. The first joint combat mission was a test of these new tactics. A swarm scouting force had established a beachhead on the outer rim of Union space, threatening to cut off supply lines to several core systems. The combined human-alien Task Force approached the enemy position with a mixture of excitement and terror. Commander Vell led the Union ships, while Captain Turner coordinated the human forces. The battle plan was deliberately chaotic, with multiple, simultaneous attacks designed to overwhelm the swarm's adaptation capabilities. Each unit was given broad objectives but told to improvise their specific tactics. Based on battlefield conditions, the results exceeded everyone's expectations. The swarm organisms, accustomed to fighting predictable enemies, found themselves facing attacks that changed faster than they could adapt. Human-led boarding parties used the enemy ship's own atmospheric systems against them, while Union forces learned to embrace the controlled chaos of human tactical doctrine. But the real breakthrough came when Dr. Patel completed his analysis of the swarm's biological structure. Working with samples recovered from the mining station, he had developed a series of biological weapons based on Earth's extremophile bacteria. These organisms evolved to survive in Earth's most hostile environments, thrived in conditions that the swarm considered uninhabitable. The swarm has never encountered life forms that prefer hostile environments, Patel explained to the joint research team. Their adaptation protocols are designed to make conditions more comfortable for themselves, not to deal with organisms that become stronger under stress. The biological weapons were tested on a small swarm outpost with devastating results. The extremophile bacteria, released into the enemy's atmospheric systems, multiplied rapidly in the toxic environment that the swarm had created. Within hours, the outpost was completely overrun by Earth organisms that treated the hostile conditions as a perfect breeding ground. News of the victory spread throughout the galaxy, carried by refugee ships and military communications. For the first time in over a year, the Union had not just stopped the swarm advance but had actually reclaimed territory. The psychological impact was enormous, giving hope to species that had begun to accept extinction as inevitable. More importantly, the victory demonstrated that the swarm was not invincible. The ancient enemy that had consumed countless civilizations had finally encountered something it could not adapt to fast enough: the chaotic, unpredictable, and utterly ruthless warfare of a species that had learned to fight for survival on one of the galaxy's most hostile worlds. The swarm's response was swift and terrifying. Intelligence reports indicated that the enemy was consolidating its forces, preparing for a massive counterattack against the Union's core systems. The ancient hive mind was learning to fear, and fear was making it desperate. "They are pulling back from their advanced positions," reported General Crix during a strategy meeting. "Our scouts indicate that they are concentrating their forces in preparation for a final assault on our capital systems." Turner studied the tactical displays with the calm focus of someone who had spent his career facing impossible odds. Good, when they concentrate their forces, they become predictable. And predictable enemies are vulnerable enemies. Emma realized that the galaxy was approaching a turning point. The swarm had been forced to abandon its methodical consumption of the Union's territory in favor of a desperate gamble. The ancient enemy was being driven to fight like humans, taking risks, making desperate moves, and betting everything on a single decisive battle. "They are learning from us," she said to Commander Vell. "The swarm is adapting to human tactics by becoming more human-like in their approach. But that might be their weakness." The final confrontation was approaching, and both sides were preparing for a battle that would determine the fate of the galaxy. The Union had learned to fight like humans, embracing chaos and unpredictability as weapons. The swarm had learned to fear, abandoning its patient strategy for desperate aggression. As the human ships prepared for the coming battle, Emma looked out at the stars and wondered if they had saved the galaxy or simply changed the nature of the war. The swarm was no longer the unstoppable force that had consumed countless worlds. It had become something else, a desperate enemy that knew it was fighting for its survival against an opponent that refused to be defeated. The universe had called for help, and the Deathworlders had answered. Now it remained to be seen whether humanity's gift for survival would be enough to save a galaxy that had forgotten how to fight for its life. The emergency klaxons screaming throughout Corallis Prime carried a sound that every refugee in the galaxy had learned to fear. The Void Swarm was approaching the Union's capital system. Dr. Emma Rodriguez watched the tactical displays in the command center as red markers representing enemy forces converged on their position like a closing fist. This was not another raid or probing attack. This was the final battle that would decide the fate of every living being in the galaxy. Enemy strength estimates? General Hayes asked, his weathered face showing the calm determination of someone who had faced impossible odds before. The veteran commander had arrived with the third wave of human reinforcements, bringing with him decades of experience in asymmetric warfare. "Every available swarm unit is converging on our position," reported Commander Vel, her crystalline form flickering with stress patterns. "Our intelligence suggests they have committed their entire remaining force to this attack." Emma studied the enemy formation with growing understanding. The swarm was no longer fighting like the patient, methodical predator that had consumed countless worlds. It was fighting like a cornered animal, throwing everything it had into one desperate gamble. The ancient hive mind had learned to feel fear, and fear was making it reckless. "They are making the same mistake that humans make when we get desperate," she said to the assembled commanders. "They are betting everything on a single decisive victory instead of playing to their strengths." Captain Turner, now wearing the insignia of overall human fleet commander, activated the holographic display showing their defensive positions. "Then we make them pay for that mistake. We have taught the Union forces to fight like humans, and the swarm has adapted by becoming more human-like. But they do not understand what it really means to be human." The battle plan that emerged from the strategy session would have been considered insane by any civilized military doctrine. The human fleet would punch straight through the center of the swarm formation, using their superior environmental resistance to fight in the toxic, crushing conditions at the heart of the enemy's mass. Meanwhile, the Union forces would execute coordinated strikes from multiple directions, forcing the swarm to divide its attention between threats it could not predict or counter. "This is not a battle we can win through superior technology or perfect tactics," Hayes explained to the mixed human and alien crews. "This is a battle we win by refusing to lose, by fighting harder and longer than our enemy thinks possible." The human volunteers who had answered the galaxy's call represented every aspect of Earth's hostile environment training. Arctic specialists who had learned to fight in conditions that would freeze most species solid. Deep-sea experts who operated under pressures that would crush standard equipment. And volcanic researchers who worked in temperatures that would melt conventional armor. As the fleets moved into position, Emma found herself aboard Turner's flagship, monitoring the biological weapons that Dr. Patel had developed. The extremophile bacteria were loaded into specially designed delivery systems, ready to be deployed in the toxic environment that the swarm would create during the battle. "Remember," Patel's voice came through the communication system, "these organisms are designed to thrive in hostile conditions. The worse the environment becomes, the more effective they will be." The first contact came at the edge of the system, where Union scout ships engaged the swarm's advance elements. The enemy fought with a ferocity that surprised even the human observers, showing none of the careful, methodical tactics that had characterized their previous attacks. They were fighting like humans, desperate, aggressive, and willing to take enormous risks for the chance at victory. "They have learned too much from us," Turner observed as he watched the tactical displays. "They are fighting with emotion instead of logic, and that makes them unpredictable." The main battle began when the human fleet punched through the swarm's outer defensive line, diving directly into the toxic cloud that surrounded the enemy's core formation. The conditions inside the swarm's defensive perimeter would have killed most galactic species within minutes, but the humans moved through it like they belonged there. Emma watched in amazement as human ships operated in environments that should have been impossible for any technology to survive. The toxic atmosphere that the swarm used as a weapon became just another obstacle to overcome, while the crushing pressure and radiation levels were simply part of the battlefield that had to be managed. The turning point came when Captain Rodriguez, leading a boarding party onto one of the swarm's command vessels, discovered something that changed their understanding of the enemy forever. The swarm was not just a hive mind. It was an ancient consciousness that had been shaped by millions of years of perfect success. It had never learned to deal with failure, never developed the psychological resilience that came from surviving repeated defeats. The core mind is in shock, Rodriguez reported from deep inside the enemy vessel. It cannot process the concept of losing to what it considers inferior opponents. Its adaptation protocols are breaking down because it cannot accept that its predictions are wrong. Hayes immediately understood the implications. It is having a psychological breakdown. The swarm has never faced an enemy that could out-adapt it, and it does not know how to cope with that reality. The final assault on the swarm's core vessel required every lesson that humanity had learned about fighting in impossible conditions. The massive ship, larger than most space stations, was filled with toxic atmosphere, crushing gravity and defensive systems that adapted to every attack. But the humans had learned to thrive in conditions that would break other species, and they pushed deeper into the vessel than anyone thought possible. Dr. Patel's biological weapons proved to be the decisive factor. Released into the ship's atmospheric systems, the extremophile bacteria spread rapidly through the hostile environment, turning the swarm's own toxic defenses against it. The ancient organism that had consumed countless worlds found itself being consumed by life forms that treated its most deadly weapons as perfect breeding conditions. The end came not with a massive explosion or dramatic final battle, but with a whisper of confusion from the swarm's core consciousness. As Emma and Turner fought their way to the central chamber, they found themselves facing an entity that was fundamentally broken by its encounter with humanity. "You should not exist," the swarm's voice echoed through the chamber, speaking in mathematical concepts that the translation system struggled to process. "Your species defies every law of survival. You thrive where you should die, fight when you should surrender, adapt when you should break." Emma stepped forward, her environmental suit protecting her from conditions that would have killed her instantly. "That is what makes us human. We refuse to accept that anything is impossible." The swarm's death was not violent, but almost peaceful, like the fading of an ancient song that had played for too long. The hive mind that had terrorized the galaxy for eons simply stopped, unable to process a reality where the prey had become the predator. As the swarm vessels throughout the galaxy went dark, Emma realized that they had not just won a battle but had fundamentally changed the nature of galactic civilization. The Union had learned to fight like humans, embracing chaos and unpredictability as tools of survival. They would never again be the peaceful, methodical civilization that had almost been consumed by an enemy they could not understand. The victory celebration on Corelli's Prime lasted for days, with representatives from hundreds of species gathering to honor the humans who had saved them. But Emma found herself thinking about the price of their success. Humanity had taught the galaxy to fight, and that knowledge could never be unlearned. "We came here to save the galaxy," she said to Turner, as they watched the celebration from the observation deck. "But I think we changed it into something else entirely." Turner nodded, his expression thoughtful. "The universe needed help, and we gave it what we could. Now it is up to them to decide what to do with what we taught them." The final message, transmitted throughout the galaxy, was simple and direct. When the universe bleeds, call the humans. They know how to stop the bleeding. It was a promise and a warning, carried by every species that had learned to fight like Deathworlders. The galaxy was safe, but it would never be the same.